There is a mirror that does not hang on any wall, a mirror not crafted from glass or silver backing. It floats quietly behind your eyes, appearing not when you wish to admire yourself, but when your soul is finally ready to reveal what it's hidden. And what it reveals is not always what we long to see. Stay until the end of this video, because the truth that emerges from that hidden mirror could change the course of your journey in ways no external force ever could. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to the channel, because this path of awakening we walk together is anything but ordinary. It's the path of the deep diver, the soul excavator, the seeker who dares to meet the unlit corridors of their own being. Shadow work. The phrase echoes with a certain mythic weight, doesn't it? Like a forgotten spell whispered in ancient temples or scrawled in the margins of forbidden books. Yet this isn't mythology. It's real, intimate, and urgent. It's the invisible rope that wraps itself around your ankles when you try to run toward your highest self. It's the unhealed wound that echoes in your relationships, the haunting voice in your head that repeats stories you didn't consciously choose to believe. But most of all, shadow work is the reckoning. Not punishment, no, that's too crude. Shadow work is the invitation, the sacred demand, the cosmic whisper that says, stop pretending, come home. To avoid it is human. We were raised in mirrors of illusion, trained to show only our sunlit faces while tucking our pain beneath perfectly curated identities. From childhood, we were taught to be good, to be nice, to be pleasant, but no one ever asked us to be whole. And so our rage curled inward, our sadness wore masks, our jealousy dressed in denial, our trauma hid in ambition, in laughter, in spiritual bypassing. We became so skilled at performance that we began to forget it was a performance at all. But within that forgetting, we lost something more precious than we realized, the permission to be real. Yet the universe has a strange compassion for the soul's hidden truths. What we refuse to see will not simply vanish. It will find new masks, new moments, new methods to be felt. A recurring argument, a self-sabotaging pattern, an anxiety with no name. The soul wants integration, and it will ask for it through discomfort until you finally sit down and listen. Shadow work is not about finding the demon inside you. It's about realizing that the demon is you, only misunderstood, unloved, orphaned from the light of your awareness. There is a truth older than any psychological theory. Wholeness is not about becoming perfect. It's about becoming complete. The shadow isn't here to shame you. It is the guardian of your lost power. That which you repress contains the very vitality you seek. Your anger is a sword buried in shame, waiting to be pulled from the stone. Your grief is a key, soaked in salt water, unlocking the depth of your heart. Your fear is a map, drawn in invisible ink, that leads to the exact place you stopped trusting life. Why do we avoid our shadow? Because we are afraid of the collapse, afraid that if we open the dam, the flood will destroy us. But the paradox is this: the flood is not your destruction, it's your baptism. In this unfolding journey, we will not just talk about shadow work as a concept, we will descend into its terrain like mythic heroes crossing into the underworld. Each section of this narrative is a torch carried deeper into the cave, not to banish the darkness, but to reveal what was always there, the forgotten fragments of self buried beneath the weight of conditioning, shame, and survival. And we must go slowly. Shadow work is not a sprint. It is the slow, sacred excavation of the soul. It is the rebuilding of a house you didn't know had rotted beneath the paint. Each insight, each memory, each emotional tremor is a brick you must touch and examine. Some will crumble, others will shine. But let's be clear, this isn't just spiritual work. This is existential surgery, and like any surgery, there is pain. But there is also relief, healing, liberation. You cannot ascend without first descending. You cannot rise until you've knelt before your own neglected self and said, "I see you. You are part of me, and I will no longer exile you." The journey into shadow work is the initiation of the true self. It is not about fixing who you are. It is about remembering who you were before the world told you what to hide. It is the soul's quiet uprising, the sacred rebellion against the mask. And here is the secret many never tell you. The shadow is not just darkness. It holds your creativity, your sensuality, your playfulness, your wildness, everything you abandoned to survive. To face your shadow is to reclaim the banquet of your being, to walk back into the temple of your soul and feast again on the full spectrum of your aliveness. So let this be your moment. Let this exploration be the lantern in your hand, the compass when your path is fogged by fear. We are about to journey into the realms most avoid, but it is precisely there that healing begins. Shadow work is not a technique. It is not something you check off like a to-do item on a morning routine list sandwiched between your affirmations and a green smoothie. Shadow work is a slow unraveling, a sacred confrontation with the parts of yourself you swore you had buried deep enough to forget. And still, like bones under thin soil, they rise with the rains. You feel them in the unease before sleep, in the quiet sadness behind your smile, in the moments when you overreact and don't know why. To understand the foundation of shadow work, we must first acknowledge the architecture of the psyche, a labyrinth made not of logic, but of memory, pain, repression, and archetypal energy. Carl Jung, who first coined the term shadow, didn't speak of evil in the religious sense. He referred instead to the unconscious, those parts of us that we have disowned, rejected, or simply left behind. And like children banished from their home, these disowned parts don't die. They linger, they whisper, they act out when ignored. The shadow is not your enemy. It is your forgotten twin. It is everything you were not allowed to be, but still are. Most people walk through life carrying bags of invisible weight. They have become so skilled at navigating pain that they confuse coping with healing. They overwork not out of ambition, but out of the fear of worthlessness. They chase love not out of genuine connection, but out of the terror of abandonment. And yet they call it just life. But life wasn't meant to be a series of survival adaptations. It was meant to be an unfolding, a remembering of wholeness. Shadow work begins where this remembering starts. Avoidance of the shadow is woven into the very fabric of modern culture. It's in the performative spirituality that bypasses pain in favor of good vibes only. It's in the endless scrolling, the compulsive productivity, the surface-level self-improvement. These are not solutions. They are distractions, beautifully packaged, socially accepted, and even encouraged. But they delay the necessary collapse. They stretch the illusion just a little further, until the mask no longer fits. Until the soul says, enough. There are several currents that run through shadow work, and while we won't name them like chapter headings, we will feel them like rivers. One is the current of awareness. To bring the unconscious into the conscious is to light the candle in the cave. Suddenly, what once terrified you becomes knowable, not controllable, but comprehensible. Another is the current of acceptance. Shadow work is not about judgment. It is about allowance. To sit with your rage and not punish it. To witness your jealousy and not pretend it isn't there. To feel your shame and not abandon yourself in the process. This is radical presence, and it is perhaps the most courageous act you will ever perform. Another theme pulsing through this work is integration. Shadow work is not an exorcism, it is a reunion. The goal is not to eliminate what you dislike, but to weave it back into the tapestry of self. If your psyche were a kingdom, then your shadow is the banished prince whose return will restore the balance. You cannot wear the crown of your own destiny while parts of you remain in exile. And let us not ignore the sacred paradox at the heart of shadow work. What you are most afraid to face often contains what you most deeply need. Your anxiety may hold the truth about a boundary you've been ignoring. Your anger may contain the voice that was never allowed to say no. Your shame may hide the exact gift you were told made you unworthy. It is in these places that gold is hidden beneath the mud. Jung called it the gold in the shadow, a buried treasure awaiting your willingness to dig. Facing the shadow also reveals how much of what we project onto others is merely a reflection of our disowned self. The critic you hate is often mirroring your own inner judge. The liar you despise might be echoing your own inability to be honest about what you feel. Shadow work strips away the illusion that others are your enemies. It exposes how your inner war paints itself across the world, and in doing so, it invites you into a deeper peace, not just with others, but with yourself. But this is not comfortable terrain. This is not the realm of ease. Shadow work asks for your blood and your tears, your honesty and your humility. It will not allow you to bypass your pain with mantras. It will drag your ego to the floor and ask you to kneel before the parts of yourself you were taught to hate. But in this very process, a new kind of beauty is born. Not the superficial kind, but the kind forged in fire. The beauty of raw, unfiltered truth. The beauty of someone who has met their monsters and made peace. And so, we come to see that the shadow is not something to be fixed. It is something to be faced, witnessed, honored. Your wholeness does not lie in your perfection, but in your ability to embrace contradiction, to hold paradox in your palms and not flinch. This is what it means to be fully human, to be holy, not because you are flawless, but because you are real. Now that we've touched the core themes, the hidden engines behind the mask, the universal call to integration, the paradox of pain and transformation, the next step is to explore these truths through deeper symbolic narratives. For the soul does not speak in theories, it speaks in stories. Imagine a forest untouched by man, ancient and breathing, where light barely kisses the forest floor and vines hang like the whispers of time itself. Deep within this forest is a path that vanishes behind you as you walk it. There are no guideposts, no signs, only instinct and the quiet pull of something that calls from beneath the surface of your own being. This is the realm of shadow work, not a textbook, but a terrain, not a theory, but a mythic return. Here, language bends. Here, the truth arrives not in explanations, but in symbols. And it is in this symbolic space that the soul speaks clearest. Let me tell you a story. There once was a young traveler who climbed a mountain in search of enlightenment. He was told that at the summit lived a wise sage who held the answers to life's deepest questions. With a heart full of hope and a mind hungry for clarity, he ascended. Days passed. Storms battered him. Rocks cut his feet. But he pushed forward, convinced that light lay above. Finally, breathless and broken, he reached the summit. The sage was there, but the sage was blind. The traveler demanded, "Tell me the meaning of life. Show me how to be whole, how to be good." The blind sage smiled. "Before I can answer, you must descend into the cave at the base of the mountain and retrieve the box buried in its darkest chamber. Only then will you understand." Furious and disillusioned, the traveler descended into the mouth of the earth, into silence so thick it dripped from the walls. The deeper he went, the more frightened he became. He began to hear voices, not from outside, but from within. Every doubt, every insecurity, every memory he had tried to forget whispered from the shadows. Finally, he found the box. When he opened it, it contained only a mirror. This story is not about a fictional traveler. It is your story. It is mine. The summit, the cave, the mirror. They are metaphors etched into the architecture of the soul. We all long for the mountaintop wisdom. We seek the sage, the guru, the insight that will finally make us feel whole. But what every true path reveals is that the answers we seek above will never arrive until we are willing to face what lies below. Enlightenment does not float in the clouds. It is mined from the mud. The cave is the unconscious. The descent is shadow work. And the mirror in the box? That is the confrontation. When you finally look into it and do not turn away, you realize that what you feared was never a monster. It was a memory, a cry for attention, a fractured part of you still waiting to be held. Another tale speaks of the wounded lion. There was once a lion who ruled a great savanna. He was proud, powerful, feared, but he carried a thorn buried in his paw, so deep that none could see it. In pain and rage, he roared louder than necessary, struck harder than he meant to, and pushed all others away. When the other animals whispered of his temper, he blamed the wind, the drought, the crows, anything but himself. But one night he limped to the edge of the savanna and looked into a still pool of water, and for the first time he saw not his strength, but his limp. And in seeing his limp, he remembered the thorn. This tale, too, is no children's fable. It is a reflection of the way unacknowledged pain turns into power plays, isolation, or defense. Many people roar to distract from their ache. They become aggressive not out of strength, but as a shield against vulnerability. But shadow work is the act of looking into the still water and choosing to see not your roar, but your limp. It is the radical choice to remove the thorn yourself, even if it means bleeding a little more in the process. These stories are not entertainment. They are encoded instructions, ancient psychic maps buried in metaphor. Your life, too, is a mythic tale in progress. Every repeated pattern is a looped scene. Every triggered moment is a portal. When your partner says something small and your chest tightens like a vice, that is not just a reaction, it is a flare from the shadow, a breadcrumb from your past self pointing you back to the unhealed. There is a reason ancient traditions across the world placed such reverence on myths, dreams, and symbols. Because the soul does not awaken through lectures. It awakens through resonance. Through that deep, wordless feeling that rises in your chest when something you hear feels like something you already knew. The symbolic dimension of shadow work is where the psyche reveals its encoded messages. And only when we slow down and enter the realm of inner story can we begin to decipher them. Even nightmares are guides. The monster that chases you down a dark hallway in your sleep may represent the part of yourself you've been running from in waking life. The collapsing building may be the old belief structure finally breaking under the weight of a new truth. Your subconscious has always been trying to speak. You just needed to learn its language. Shadow work asks you to become a dream walker in your own psyche, a myth reader of your own life. It invites you to stop living only at the surface and to enter the symbolic layer beneath. Because the deeper meaning is always there, beneath the argument, beneath the anxiety, beneath the overreaction. You are not just a person with issues. You are a character in a mythic unfolding, where every shadow you face is a dragon that guards a treasure. And here's the twist of the tale. The dragon is not trying to kill you. It is waiting for you to realize you're not a peasant. It's waiting for you to remember you're the knight. You've been afraid of yourself, but you've also been seeking yourself. You just didn't know both roads led to the same place. Now that we've entered the realm of the symbolic, now that we've seen how shadow work reveals itself through story, myth, and dream, the next question is, how do we live it? Now that we've traversed the forests of metaphor and walked with the mythic threads of the soul's hidden terrain, the question becomes not just why to face your shadow, but how. Not as a sterile prescription, but as a sacred practice. Shadow work must descend from the heavens of philosophy into the bones of your everyday life. Otherwise, it remains only a concept, hollow, beautiful, but uninhabited. Healing is not a theory. It is a lived process that pulses through the way you speak, react, love, cry, and choose. Integration begins in the moments you least expect. When your child screams and you feel rage rise in you like a volcano, that is not failure. It is an invitation. When your partner withdraws and your chest burns with the fear of abandonment, that is not weakness. It is the resurfacing of an ancient wound. Every time life touches a nerve, your shadow is showing you where you still ache. These are not mere triggers. They are coordinates, portals to your past self marked by emotion, waiting to be revisited with awareness instead of reaction. To integrate shadow work into your daily life is to become a sacred observer, not passive, not detached, but awake. You begin to notice when your laughter hides discomfort. You recognize when your silence is not peace, but fear of confrontation. You observe when you criticize others and ask yourself, what part of me am I unconsciously judging? Every judgment becomes a mirror. Every emotion becomes a messenger. Every irritation becomes a teacher. But this is not a romantic process. It is messy. It often begins with grief. Not the grief of what you've lost, but of what you abandoned in yourself long ago. You may grieve the younger version of you who silenced their voice to survive. You may grieve the authentic self you had to mask in order to be accepted. Real-world shadow work feels like crying in your car, like apologizing without defensiveness, like sitting alone on a Friday night and realizing you've been running from yourself for years. It is in these very human, unglamorous spaces that transformation roots itself, not in the grand declarations, but in the small, consistent acts of truth. When you choose to pause instead of react, to listen instead of defend, to feel instead of flee, that is shadow work in motion. And every time you do this, even just a little, you rewrite the code, you shift the story, you reclaim the parts of yourself that were once exiled in fear. This process also reshapes relationships. For what is relationship if not the great mirror of our own unconscious? You begin to see how you choose people not just for love, but for unresolved lessons. The friend who always lets you down may be echoing the parent who never showed up. The partner who won't commit may be reflecting your own fear of intimacy. Shadow work doesn't just help you fix relationships, it helps you see them for what they are, for what they reflect, and most importantly, for what they require in order to grow. In real life, this often looks like conversations that tremble with truth. It looks like setting boundaries with shaking hands because you've never allowed yourself to say no before. It looks like choosing to leave a job, a friendship, or even a way of thinking that once defined you, because the cost of self-abandonment has finally become too high. Integration is not just about doing something differently. It's about being someone more whole. It's about shedding the armor, layer by layer, and daring to show up as who you truly are, even when it terrifies you. And yes, sometimes that means getting professional support, a therapist, a healer, a circle of souls who can hold space without judgment. Because shadow work isn't always safe to do alone. Some wounds need the hands of another to help you stitch them. There is no shame in seeking help. In fact, the willingness to be witnessed in your brokenness is one of the deepest acts of courage a person can offer the world. Real-world shadow work also shifts your creativity. When you no longer edit your truth to fit in, your voice deepens. Your art sharpens. Your words ring with something unmistakably you. The parts of you that were silenced begin to sing. You no longer create from perfectionism. You create from presence, from permission, from fire. It also alters your spiritual practice. No longer do you use meditation to escape discomfort. Now you use it to enter it, with tenderness, with inquiry, with honesty. You pray not just for peace, but for truth. You stop seeking only light and begin honoring the sacred necessity of darkness. Because without the night, you cannot see the stars, and without the descent, there can be no resurrection. In real life, shadow work will often make things more complicated before it makes them more clear. You may feel more confused, more raw, more uncertain. That is not regression, it is recalibration. You are untangling decades of programming. You are choosing awareness over autopilot, That is not weakness. That is rebirth. And slowly, it begins to show. You find yourself less reactive, more compassionate. Not because you've forced yourself to be kind, but because you've understood the pain behind the mask. Your empathy deepens because your own healing has made you spacious. You forgive not because you've been told to, but because you've finally felt how much it frees you to let go. Shadow work in the real world is subtle. It's not flashy. No one may ever applaud it, but you will feel it in the way your body softens around your own truth, in the way your heart stops clenching at your own reflection, in the way you no longer need to pretend to be anything but everything that you are. And now we arrive, not at the end, but at the threshold. The work of the shadow does not complete itself in one revelation, one ritual, or one retreat. It is a lifelong pilgrimage, a spiral staircase where each turn takes you deeper and yet higher at the same time. But you have walked with us through the mist, into the myth, and back again to the stillness of your own being. You've looked into the cave. You've listened for the footsteps of your forgotten self echoing in the darkness. And you've begun to understand. What you feared was not the shadow. It was your own light, buried beneath it. The journey of shadow work is not linear. It coils. It repeats. It arrives unannounced in the middle of the day and lingers in dreams you don't understand until years later. But once your eyes have adjusted to its language, you begin to see it everywhere. Not as an enemy, but as a compass. A reminder that every discomfort is sacred data, that every wound is a whisper from a part of you still waiting to be loved. You are not broken. Let this truth echo through every crack you once thought disqualified you from wholeness. You are layered, complex, ancient even. You carry the songs of ancestors and the silence of secrets never spoken aloud. But now, something stirs. Now you've turned toward what most people run from. You've dared to name the unspeakable, to feel the unbearable, and to hold yourself through it, not perfectly, but honestly. And that honesty is the very doorway to liberation. There is a quiet revolution that begins when you choose to face yourself fully. You stop chasing validation and begin embodying truth. You stop clinging to roles, titles, and polished identities. You begin showing up as something raw, something unfiltered, something undeniably real, and people will notice. Some will be magnetized by your authenticity. Others will be terrified by it, but you will no longer shapeshift to be accepted. Because once you've stood naked before your own soul, no costume will ever feel right again. You may begin to walk slower, speak less, feel more. The world may call it withdrawal, but it is actually arrival. You are arriving in your body, your emotions, your integrity. You are no longer fleeing your own inner gaze. This is not regression. This is awakening. And yes, you will still feel pain. Shadow work does not promise eternal happiness. It promises wholeness. And wholeness includes sorrow. It includes failure. It includes rage. But it holds these not as flaws to be fixed, but as colors in the tapestry. You are not meant to be one note. You are a symphony. This is the soul's graduation, when you no longer fear your inner storms, but learn to dance in their rain. When you greet your shadows not with shame, but with reverence. When you meet your reflection, not with critique, but with recognition. There you are, you whisper to yourself. I've been looking for you. And when you rise, because you will, you rise differently. You don't rise above others. You rise within yourself, not from ego, but from essence. Not from pretending, but from presence. You become rooted, like a tree that no longer fears the wind because its roots have met the underworld. And from this rootedness, you bloom, not perfectly, but powerfully. So what now? Now you walk the path with more awareness. You catch yourself before old wounds hijack new moments. You apologize when you realize you've projected. You cry without explanation. You love without armor. You pause. You feel. You take responsibility, not because you are to blame, but because you are that powerful. Shadow work is a return to your voice, to your truth, to your wholeness. This is your call to become the alchemist of your own story, to transmute pain into wisdom, to turn the lead of your shame into the gold of self-acceptance. This is the moment you stop waiting to be rescued and instead light your own torch and begin walking the labyrinth. You may tremble, you may fall, but you will rise again, and each time a little more you than before. Do not wait until life collapses to begin this work. Begin now. Begin softly. Begin honestly. You do not have to go fast. You only have to go deep. And if you've made it here, truly here, you already have. Now ask yourself, as the mirror is passed to you, are you still avoiding your shadow work, or are you ready to face it, and finally, to heal?